So we talked in the previous podcast about the history of capital punishment in Canada, but what a lot of people don't know or don't talk about were the people that literally had to execute these convicted murderers, or basically the hangman. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of these people, because each one are significant, because without them, the ultimate penalty for the ultimate crime wouldn't have been administered. It was a rough job, and you'll see by some of the stories, each one had their own, background. Now, the first professional executioner in Canadian history was the very interesting John Radcliffe. He was put on a federal payroll as a hangman by a Dominion or Canadian Order in Council in 1892 on the recommendation of the Justice Minister at the time, Sir John Thompson. Radcliffe is often described as having trained under British hangman William Marwood, although there is no documentary proof for this. He can be shown to have hanged at least 65 people in Canada, although his life total was probably much higher. At his death, the Toronto Telegram said he had logged 150 executions. He eventually died of alcohol-related illness in Toronto on February 26, 1911, at the age of 55. Now, Arthur Ellis, the pseudonym for Arthur B. Ellis, was a British man who became Canada's official hangman in 1913, who replaced Radcliffe. Now, Ellis worked as a hangman in Canada until the botched execution of Thomasina Sarot in Montreal in 1935, in which the weight was incorrect and she was decapitated. He died in poverty in Montreal in July 1938 and lies buried in the Mount Royal Cemetery. Now, the Crime Writers of Canada present annual literary awards, the Arthur Ellis Awards, named after his pseudonym. Ellis is prominently featured in a 2008 documentary, Hangman's Graveyard. The executioner that we're going to talk about next is Camille Branchot, who worked under a pseudonym. He succeeded Ellis. Branchot was on the Quebec government's payroll as a hangman and executed people elsewhere in the country on a piecework or freelance basis. The hangman at the time was traditionally based in Montreal, where between 1912 and 1960, the gallows at Bordeaux Prison saw more executions take place there than any other correctional facility in Canada, with 85. Now, Branchot carried out many executions for which he was not paid in the post-war period of Canada, such as the double hanging of Leonard Jackson and Stephen Souchon of the Boyd Gang at the Don Jail in 1952, and Robert Raymond Cook's controversial execution in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta in 1962. Now, according to published reports, the type of execution that was followed by these individuals was the first method called hoisting, in which a rope would be thrown over a beam and the convicted person would then be hoisted into the air by others pulling on the rope. The slip knot would then tightly close around the neck until strangulation. A variation of this included a person with a rope around the neck to stand on a cart, and then we would push from under him. This led to the development of suspension, in which the drop, caused by jerking something from underneath the offender, became the main component of the execution. Now, executioners at the time, especially the 1800s, experimented with the length of rope for the drop. They discovered new ways of causing instant unconsciousness and quick death upon hanging. In 1872, the standard length of a drop extended to nearly 5 feet, or I think it was 4 feet 10 inches, which dislocated the neck perfectly. Almost 1 year later, the length of the drop was extended to 7 feet, so between 5 and 7 feet. Now, the majority of offenders put to death by Canadian civil inventorious were executed by the long drop technique of hanging, developed in the UK by William Marwood. This method ensured that the prisoner's neck was broken instantly at the end of the drop, resulting in the prisoner dying of asphyxia while unconscious, which was considered more humane than a slow death by strangulation, which often resulted from the previous short drop method. The short drop sometimes gave a period of suffering before death finally took place. Now, early in his career, John Radcliffe persuaded several sheriffs in Ontario and Quebec to let him use an alternate method in which a condemned prisoner was jerked into the air. A gallows of this type was used for the execution of Robert Neal at Toronto's Don Jail on February 29, 1888. Now, the old plan of a drop was discarded for a more merciful machine by which the prisoner jerked up from a platform on the ground level by a weight of 280 pounds, which is suspended by independent rope pending the execution. At the words, "Forgive us our trespasses," the executioner drove his chisel against a light rope that held a ponderous iron at the other end of the noose, and in an instant the heavy weight fell with a thud. Now, this caused the pinioned body to be jerked in the air and hung dangling between the rough posts of the scaffold. Now, the hanging of Reginald Burchill in Woodstock, Ontario, November 1890, seems to be the last time a device of this kind was used. Radcliffe had first been exposed to executions as a Royal Navy seaman, helping with shipboard hangings of pirates in the South China Sea, and it's possible he was trying to approximate something similar to hanging a man on a ship's yardarm. After Burchill's hanging, Radcliffe used the traditional long drop method, as did his successors. Now, while hanging was a relatively humane method of execution under ideal condition with an expert executioner, mistakes did and could happen. Condemned prisoners were decapitated by accident at Headingley Jail in Manitoba and Bordeaux Jail in Montreal, and a prisoner at the Don Jail in Toronto hit the floor of the room below and was strangled by the hangman. Now, some Canadian jails, such as those in Toronto, Whitby, and Ottawa, Headingley, Manitoba, and Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, had permanent indoor execution facilities, but more typically offenders were hanged on a scaffold built for the occasion in the jail yard. Now, again, military prisoners sentenced to death under Canadian military law were shot by a firing squad. Now, relating public opinion of these executions, although reintroducing the death penalty in Canada is extremely unlikely, support for Campbellton public punishment is similar to its support in the United States, where it is carried out regularly in some states and is on the books in most states and on the federal level. While opposition to the death penalty increased in the 1990s and early 2000s, in recent years Canadians have merged closer to the U.S.'s position. In a poll taken in 2004, only 48% of Canadians favored death for murders, comparing to 62% in 2010. According to one poll, support for the death penalty in Canada is approximately the same as its support in the United States, at 63% in both countries as of 2013. A 2011 poll by the Toronto Sun found that 66% of Canadians favored capital punishment, but only 41% would actually support its reintroduction in Canada. A 2020 poll by research company found that 51% of Canadians are in favor of reinstating the death penalty for murder in the nation. However, almost half of Canadians select life imprisonment without the possibility of parole over the death penalty as their preferred punishment in cases of murder. Since abolition, only two parties were known to have advocated to bring it back: the Reform Party of Canada, which lasted for 12 years until 2000, and the National Advancement Party of Canada since 2014. Now, among the reasons cited for banning capital punishment in Canada were fears about wrongful convictions, concerns about the state taking people's lives, and uncertainty about the death penalty's role as a deterrent for crime. This all comes about, ladies and gentlemen, because of the Truscott case. Well, that's the most heavy miscarriage of justice, I think, in Canadian history. Although the Marshall case and the Milgard case and a few others were bad, but this is just beyond the pale. He was convicted when he was a 14-year-old in 1959 for murdering one of his younger colleagues. Now, that had a significant impetus towards the abolition of capital punishment. Truscott was sentenced to death for the murder of a classmate for a crime he did not commit, and a lot of people believe he was railroaded as a person that was under 16. He wasn't given the rights that would be provided under the charter for a similar, or what he called investigative incident in 2020. His sentence was later commuted to a life sentence, and in 2007 he was acquitted of the charges. Although the appeal court, for some reason, and it's still controversial, did not state that he was in fact innocent. There were some, the Fifth Estate documentary on this, which is available on YouTube. Our CBC documentary investigative group details the case quite stronger. Now, in the 1990s, Canada did extradite a criminal Charles Ng to the United States, even though he appealed to the authorities, and he did not want to potentially face execution in the U.S. The Supreme Court of Canada, the case United States versus Burns, that determined that Canada should not extradite persons to face trial in other countries for crimes punishable by death unless Canada has received insurance that the foreign state will not apply the death penalty, essentially overturning Kinder versus Canada Minister of Justice of 91. This is similar to the extradition policies of other nations, such as Germany, France, Netherlands, Spain, Italy, United Kingdom, Israel, Mexico, Colombia, and Australia, which also refuse to extradite prisoners who may be condemned to death. Extradition where the death penalty is possible was ruled a violation of the European Convention of Human Rights in the case of Suring versus UK, outlawing the practice in member states of the Council of Europe, of which all the European Union member states are part. Now, in November 2007, Canada's minority Conservative government reversed the long-standing policy of automatically requesting clemency for Canadian citizens sentenced to capital punishment. The ongoing case of Alberta-born Ronald L. Smith, who has been on death row in the United States since 1982 after being convicted of murdering two people and who continues to seek calls for clemency from the Canadian government, prompted Canadian Public Safety Minister Stockwell Day to announce the change in policy. Day has stated that each situation should be handled on a case-by-case basis. Smith's case resulted in a sharp divide between the Liberals and Conservatives, while the Liberals passing a motion declaring that the government should stand consistently against the death penalty as a matter of principle, both in Canada and around the world. However, an overwhelming majority of Conservatives supported the change in policy. In a 2011 interview given to the media in Canada, then Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper affirmed his private support for capital punishment by saying, "I personally think there are times when capital punishment is appropriate." Now, the aspect of this, it all comes down to 1963. If Diefenbaker would have stayed in power, the Conservatives would have took over by Pearson. I think capital punishment would have been on the books for a little time longer, but that's speculation. But the idea is, in the late 1950s into the early 1960s, we had some prominent executions that were going on, New Brunswick, throughout the West. But the Ontario case, where the cop murder and the FBI situation, where a person was killed, and the botched execution in that Don jail in '63. But the Truscott case did not get really heavy until the Liberals went in, and this hour 7 days talked about the case, the famous Lapierre crying on TV. But I would suggest to anybody listening to this podcast who don't know about the Truscott case, listen to the YouTube Fifth Estate, the breakdown of the case. Should a 12, 13, 14-year-old person in a organized country be railroaded and sentenced to death because the system basically felt he was guilty before he was even brought to trial? That was a railroad of justice. There were certain people that were executed, like Joe Richard, my cousin in New Brunswick, that deserved the death penalty because he was a bad pup. But the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, if your conscience tells you that execution is something you're in favor of, that's your decision. But I think it's the federal government mandate in Canada to not have executions, because mercy is part of Canada. We show mercy to immigrants. We show mercy to the poor when we can. Sure, we make mistakes like with the Aboriginal water issue across Canada, but we are a merciful nation. No merciful nation should execute his own citizens. As bad as these people are, killing another person doesn't bring the other person back. So, I mean, that's my thought. And I don't want my tax money to be paying for executioners like the people we just mentioned. My tax money should be used for prevention, for basically counseling. But like I said, each case is individual. As a podcaster, I have my opinion. I don't push my opinions on other people. I may disagree, but I don't tell another podcaster what to do. But if you're a Canadian citizen, it's good to know your history. And again, I provide these podcasts as a public service. I'm not trying to tell you what to think or not to think. You can do what you want. But people need to know where we come from to know where we're going, especially in Canada in 2020. Like the anti-vaxxers and this all craziness there. 2 words, polio and tuberculosis. Look it up. Have a good day. Bye.